Our first contestant today, this evening, is Ted Gayford. Dismissed to victory. Dismissed to victory, Ted Gayford.
Mr. Contest Master, fellow strugglers and achievers, Gandhi said that at first they will deny you, then they will laugh at you, and finally they will fight you, and you will win. The struggles that you have faced in the past, the struggles that you face today, and the struggles that you are going to face tomorrow are what define each and every one of you in this room. Tonight, I want to tell you about one individual and his struggles. Now, normally a person's name is the sweetest sound in any language to them. But after years of being terrorized, our protagonist no longer likes the sound of his name. So we're simply going to call him Everett. When Everett was 12 months old, he was diagnosed with a disease. Now, Everett looked perfectly fine. He had 2 feet with 10 toes, 2 hands with 10 fingers. Instead of ears, he could hear the freight train far off in the distance. Instead of eyes, he could see a mile off. That little baby boy even had a full head of hair. You see, Everett's problem was in his mind. His antics made Charlie Sheen look like an amateur. You would not have wanted to have been his mother or his father those first 12 months. He did not sleep one night through. When he was finally old enough to sit at the table, he couldn't sit for more than a minute at a time. He bounced from room to room, from activity to activity. He was never satisfied. And so, they went to the doctors. They went to every doctor from the letter A through to the letter Z. To the audiologist, the cardiologist, the dermatologist, the endocrinologist, the gastroenterologist, the immunologist. And finally, they had an answer. It was determined that Everett was suffering from something called sensory integration disorder. The short of it is that basically his mind was never satisfied. It was always looking for stimulus. Now, like I said, Everett was a good-looking boy. He didn't have any broken bones. He wasn't bleeding from anywhere. So when people were told about this thing, they didn't believe. The only people that believed that Everett was sick were his parents and his doctors. Everett's parents would tell their friends about this thing called sensory integration disorder. They made a funny face. They stopped talking to people about it. Everett's own grandparents didn't understand. They said he was just being a little boy. He'd grow out of it. They dismissed his problem and any help that Everett might need. A few years later, Everett went on to school. And when he got there, they determined that he was suffering from some additional problems, from ADD as well as some learning disabilities. How did they help Everett? Well, they placed him in the 3rd floor of that school in a little classroom. They would take him out of that little classroom and they would put him into a normal one. And they did this over and over and over and over again for days, months, years on end. How they thought they were helping him, I don't know. He never sat through one entire lesson. He had holes in his education. But something else happened during that time. The other children in that school, they realized that there was that little room up there. And what do children do when they realize you're different? They make fun of you. They ridicule you. You become the butt of the joke. Everett became Everett the rat. Or they would say stuff like, "Here comes Mount Everest." Now that hurt. Everett was a portly boy. He worked hard for years. 7th grade had finally come. This was going to be the big year. His teachers told him that if he did good this year, he could get out of the little classroom. He spent every extra minute he had that year working on his homework. And he did pretty good. He got all C's and 1 B. But at the end of the year, he had to take Mrs. Cribb's science class test. He just didn't get science. He got a D. They placed him back in that little room for another year. The whole way, they dismissed him. They laughed at him. They fought him. 13 miserable years of education, 1 extra for the redo of 1st grade, It was finally senior year of high school. Everett had come to a crossroad. He had to make a decision. Was he going to let them win, or was he going to win? Everett spent that entire year applying to every public college and university he could. One of them accepted him, a school by the name of Western Illinois University in Macomb. He was accepted on academic probation. Now, Everett's father was a smart man. He knew nothing comes from nothing. And when he dropped his son off at that school, he said, "Son, if you don't make it here, don't come home. Go straight to the recruiter." Everett didn't need that, because if you put the right person in the right place, they will blossom. And Western was the right place for Everett. He got a 3.8 GPA his first semester. Second semester, he did it again. Sophomore year, he became a residential assistant. Senior year, he was on a sport. He graduated with honors. Where is Everett today? He's working on his graduate studies in an Ivy League school. So I want you to do me a favor. The next time you're challenged, the next time you come to a crossroad, please think of Everett. Contest Master.
So our next speaker will be Jack Lewis Williams. Be prepared. Be prepared, Jack Lewis Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, distinguished dignitaries, honored guests. Ask any Boy Scout what you need to do to be a good scout. Ask any skydiver what you need to do to avoid a treacherous situation. Ask any mother early on a Saturday morning packing a diaper bag, getting ready to tote her toddler out for a day of adventure. What should you do? Be prepared. As I stood loading the laundry into the wash, I shook my head in annoyance. I had just returned home from an amazing business trip, capped off by a one-on-one coaching session with a world-class skydiver. I was riding high. My children had just returned from a youth retreat in San Antonio. My 13-year-old son, Eric, and my 15-year-old daughter, Amanda. As we arrived at the house, I was excited, looking forward to reviewing our trips with each other, sharing what had happened. Sometimes things don't turn out that way. It all started with one sentence. Guys, we need to get this place cleaned up a bit. Next thing I know, it was on like Donkey Kong. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. I'm not going to do that. You do that. That was your mess. What did I do? I did what any good, smart, logical parent would do. I dove right in the middle. After a few minutes, we all went our separate ways. I went to do the laundry. They went upstairs to clean the rooms. I shook my head, and I thought as I dropped the laundry into the wash, give it an hour, they'll be okay. We'll all return to normal. We can share our stories and move on. The next thing I know, I heard a sound that will stay with me for the rest of my life. My daughter screamed out. I dropped the basket. Before I knew it, I had crossed 2 flights of stairs. As I stepped onto the landing, into the second story, I saw into my son's room. I saw the source of my daughter's terror. My son was hanging lifeless from the ceiling. I don't remember closing the gap between the doorway and him. I do remember reaching up, pulling the noose from around his neck, cradling his body in my arms, and I knew at that moment that he was gone. The blood had coagulated across his nose and his mouth and his face, and it was drying. The first thing I thought was, how long? how long has this boy been without breath? I turned to leave the room. I crossed the threshold of his room out onto the landing again, and it hit me. There's no one. You've got no one. I knelt down, laid his body at my feet, tilted his head back, cleared his airway, laid my fingers on his neck, no pulse. Gave him a rescue breath. Watched his chest rise and fall. As his chest rose, I thought, how can I survive this? I instantly started chest compressions. My first thought was, it's been so long since I've trained. How many? 5, 10, 15? I did what any good musician would do. I picked a good beat and I went with it. Press, compress, compress, breathe. Press, compress, compress, breathe. The adrenaline was flowing so hard, I thought I would snap his rib cage. I had to keep telling myself, calm down, calm down, calm down. After what seemed like 6, 7, 8 series, his heart started. It was beating so fast I thought it would explode. As I sat looking at him, again the thought hit me, how long has he been without oxygen? He took a breath. I waited. No breath. So I gave him a breath. I waited. He took a breath. We went back like this for what seemed like eternity until a paramedic showed up at the stairs, looked at me, and started asking questions. At that moment, I was giving Eric a breath. And I looked up at him and I said, young man, you get my son in the ambulance. You get him on oxygen and life support, and I'll answer every question you have. He apologized. They moved in. Before I knew it, we were in an ambulance headed towards St. Anthony's. When we arrived at St. Anthony's, a team of people were there waiting. They took Eric, disappeared behind closed doors. Approximately 30 minutes later, they showed back up. Doctor came to me, said, Mr. Williams, I'm sorry, but we do not have the pediatric care here to handle this kind of emergency. Your son needs to go to Cardinal Glennon. Before I knew it, we were back in an ambulance, headed down 270 in an ice and snowstorm at a speed that I was very uncomfortable with. Folks, cardiac arrest in teenagers is responsible for 6,000 emergencies a year, from the ages of 18 down. Applied CPR in the first few minutes can double or triple the chance of someone's survival. The message is simple. Get certified. Take a class. Stay current. The life you save may one day be someone near and dear to you or a total stranger. For those of you wondering, Eric graduated high school last year. We got to him just under 5 minutes. After a coma and extended rehabilitation, my son is doing well today. Mr. Contest Master.
Our next speaker, Arnita Jones. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. Arnita Jones.
Some people survived the earthquake in Haiti. Others live to talk about Hurricane Katrina. And most recently, the devastation of a tornado through the St. Louis area and southern states. Is it possible that everything happens for a reason? Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, and our most distinguished guests. If you find yourself in a situation trying to figure out why? After time and time again, you just can't find the right job. Or why, out of all your siblings, you always end up taking care of your cantankerous old father. Or why you've been on so many dates and just haven't quite found the right person. If you're disappointed in life and feeling stuck, I want to share a few things with you to encourage you why it's important to believe and hold on to that fact that everything happens for a reason. As well as share a little story with you about a couple who found out just how important it was to know and hold on to that fact. Now, a few things happen when you choose to believe in that age-old cliche that everything happens for a reason. It makes you stronger because you have confidence in yourself and your abilities and the decisions that you make in life. It makes you wiser because you understand how the dots connect. Because A happened, it led you to B, and then C happened. For example, you lost your job. You decided to go back to school, and now you own your own business. You also are more in touch with who you are. You understand that your life isn't random, that someone from up above just didn't roll a pair of dice and say, whoops, there's John's life. Now, don't misunderstand me. There are some things that can happen in our life, and it will really challenge you and rock you to your core. And it can be anything. Your spouse gambles away all your life savings. You lose your home or your job. You become ill at the most inopportune time, or a loved one dies. I am here tonight to reassure you that when you choose to believe that everything happens for a reason, the whole world opens up to you and you view it a little differently. Allow me to share a story with you by a couple by the name of Lucille and Leroy. Now, they were newly married and wanting to start a family. Lucille already had a son from a prior marriage. Leroy had no children. So they began to try and try and try and try. Because you know the fun is in the trying. But they just weren't conceiving that child. So they decided to go to the doctor. Doctor ran some tests, and of course this is back in the 70s, so we didn't have instant messaging, email, none of that. They mailed a letter to their home. As they anxiously awaited that letter, this particular day, Leroy was in the garage tinkering around with the cars as he normally does. Lucille was in the kitchen cooking dinner for the family. And the letters arrived. Anxiously, Lucille opened them up. The first one read, "Congratulations! Lucille, you are perfectly healthy and can conceive a child." She thought, phew, great, let's see what the other one says. The next letter said, "Dear Leroy, I regret to inform you, you cannot have children. You are sterile." Angry, she ripped up the letters and threw them away. What could she do? How could she? What options do they have? He wanted a child. How could he? What could they do? What should she share with them? She made a decision at that moment not to tell him. And simply yelled out to the garage, "Honey, the results came in from the test. We're both fine. We just got to keep trying." Soon thereafter, Lucille started to feel nauseous and tired. So she went back to the doctor, and of course that doctor, knowing that they couldn't have children, ran some more tests and shared with them that Lucille had a tumor. Gave her a prescription strong enough to shrink that tumor and sent her on her way. On the way to the pharmacy, the prescription blew out the window. Lucille, not wanting to take medicine anyway, decided, I won't get it filled. But the symptoms persisted. So she went to another doctor, different doctor. And he ran a special test and sent her home and said, I'll call you in a couple days. A couple days later, the doctor called and said, congratulations, you're pregnant. Now, this isn't some random story, something that I pulled off of Google. Lucille and Leroy are my parents. And I continue to think, what would have happened if my mother chose to tell my father, you can't have children, you're sterile, there's nothing we can do? Or what if she had that prescription filled that was strong enough to shrink a tumor? Would I have the mental capacity to share this story with you today? Ladies and gentlemen, as odd as it sounds, everything happens for a reason. Even in the toughest trials and tribulations we go through, there are hidden nuggets of wisdom, things that we have to learn, and somehow the universe knows we wouldn't learn those lessons any other way. Mr. Contest Master.
Mark Herman, characteristics of a professor. Characteristics of a professor, Mark Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, distinguished guests, welcome. Just want to start by mentioning a question right quick. It's characteristics of a profession. George Washington, John Rockefeller, Bill Gates. Each of these were members of unique professions. And for them to be considered members of such professions, they underwent specialized training. They abided by a high set of standards. They enforced those standards when necessary. And of course, they passed on all that they learned through their leadership, their writings, and their legacies. They were clearly professionals, clearly members of professions. Many of us too here are members of professions. But we have to ask ourselves, do we really know what that means? Can you define a profession? Well, as a member of the profession of arms, I have lived it, studied it, and learned a few characteristics that help define that very question. And these characteristics are expertise, standards, enforcement, and education. And I'll share these with you in a bit more detail in hopes of helping define what it means to be a profession for you all. My first characteristic of a profession is expertise. Expertise is the foundation for a profession. It is what separates a profession from an occupation, a calling from a job. It's quite interesting, in fact. In the mid-centuries, people used to receive their names based on their expertise. Blacksmiths were named Smith. Bread bakers were named Baker. Fishermen, well, they were named Fisher. This signified that those individuals had the expertise to fulfill a particular task. They could be trusted to perform that duty. Today, we don't name ourselves after our expertise, but we have titles that follow our names to indicate such. Titles like MD or PhD, or in many of our cases, DTM or CTM. They indicate that we have the expertise required to fulfill a particular task. We can, too, be trusted. But people aren't born with the expertise or membership of a profession. They must first meet a set of standards, which is my second characteristic of a profession. Standards are the guiding principles for a profession. They encompass morals, values, ethics, and the general guidelines of a profession. Standards also provide protection for those seeking services. Like I mentioned prior, people aren't just born into a profession. They must meet a long set of educational goals. They must be licensed and credentialed. And that's what provides the protection for those seeking their services. But as we all know, no person is perfect. No profession is perfect either. And therefore, standards must be enforced. Enforcement of standards is my third characteristic of a profession. Enforcement of standards is what provides legitimacy and credibility to the profession. Take, for instance, the financial profession. Over the last few years, we've seen members of such profession make bad choices, unethical in some instances. They've been punished, in some cases incarcerated. But because that profession enforces their standards, as well as societal standards, we still have trust in them. They're still credible in our eyes. We still seek their services, do we not? My money's in the bank. But professions can't hope to just continually enforce their standards. They have to learn from their mistakes. And that's through education. And that's my final characteristic of a profession. We as Toastmasters are well versed in education. Education for a profession allows it to adapt and prepare for the future, lest they become extinct. A great example of this is in the April edition of Toastmasters magazine. In it, an article, a profile on Mr. Dick Hendricks, a 101-year-old distinguished Toastmaster. In it, Mr. Hendricks notes in his 54 years of being a member of Toastmasters, the continuous evolution of educational material. That's what kept Toastmasters viable in his eyes, relevant to us all. And it's that education, the reason for education, that a profession must do such. These are just a few characteristics of a profession that, if applied correctly, can set your profession above the rest. It's quite easy, in fact. I stand before you today displaying my expertise in communication. I obviously am trying to meet set standards. And there's members of the audience that's going to enforce those standards, hopefully not too harshly. But above all, I am learning from this experience and members such as you all. It's a great educational opportunity for anyone. I'll leave you with just one last thought. Perhaps another time I would be of the profession of communication. My name would be Toastmaster, Mr. Contest Master.
All right, so third place goes to Jack Lewis Williams.
Well, we need to.
Hey, George?
This way.
Okay, now for the second place for the 2010-2011 International Speech Contest goes to Ellen Kirby. Now we gotta go ahead and do now our first place winner for the 2010-2011 speech contest that goes to Arnita Jones.